Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome back to my channel. This time I thought I would just talk a little bit about my reading resolutions for 2021. Obviously this is the time with a brand new year coming in to really get thinking about reflecting on what the previous year has been like and what we want the next year to be as well. I feel very lucky. I had a lot of time and space to be able to read in 2020, and so I was able to read a lot more than I have in previous years. And have a lot more time to really focus on books. But at the same time, I realize that's not only a very privileged and very lucky position to be in, but also that can change. And also that there were parts of 2020 where I really just couldn't focus on reading at all. I either had audio books of non-fiction or just focus on non-fiction because that's easier sometimes, or whatever else. But here are some of my little resolutions for 2021. Now, firstly, I should start by saying I don't believe it's normally about the number of books. I think that can be a good waypoint to kind of work out how you're doing with your reading, and particularly if you want to motivate yourself to read a bit more, because I know sometimes people always sort of say, I don't give myself enough time for reading. And so setting a goal of, a book a week or a book every 2 weeks or a book a month or whatever can be really stabilizing for them in terms of, okay, how am I doing with reading? I've read way more than I thought, or I haven't read nearly as much as I thought I would be able to. What do I need to change? Or how can I keep going, or anything like that? So for me, I don't really want to set it necessarily as a number. That said, I do have a number in mind that I'd probably be sticking with. But again, this is with the kind of idea that if that all goes wrong and doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world. So last year, I somehow read about 300 and something books. Don't really know what happened there. Partly that was using, having audiobooks available and sort of discovering how easy it was to get a lot of them. So shout out to Libby and to BorrowBox, which are both really great library apps, at least in the UK. I don't know about elsewhere, that allow you to get a lot of the digital resources that your libraries have, both ebooks and audiobooks. And so I discovered loads more audiobooks and took those when I was out on walks or out running or whatever else, or just laying in bed. And that I felt was a really useful way to help me engage with some stories when I maybe wasn't in the right frame of mind to be doing a lot of reading, with my eyes. So that is kind of how I probably read about 300 or so books last year. But I've sort of set a kind of goal of about 200 for this coming year. And again, if that doesn't happen, meh. But I also know that, for example, I'm going to be working from home for most of this coming year. And so I know that I'm going to have the time, particularly, the pandemic hasn't really gone anywhere. COVID is still in existence, although obviously vaccines and things are coming. So there is some hope. But as a result, there are going to be a lot of evenings, particularly early in the year when it's cold and when it's dark, when I'm probably not going to be going out much or doing much externally. So I can sit down with a book, kind of properly curl up and read and enjoy. So that seems a sensible one to me. As you also know, well, if you've maybe seen some of my videos before, I have set myself the rather foolish challenge of reading all of the Booker Prize shortlisted novels from the last 50 or so years. All of the Booker Prize's history. And that is a goal that when I set it, I knew wouldn't be able to be done in 1 or 2 years, but would take a good number of years. I think I read about 120, 130 Booker Prize shortlisted books this year, which is a lot, but there's still many, many more to go. And so I'm leaving myself open to spreading this goal over several years. With that in mind, I have kind of purposely chosen areas that I really want to focus on. So I know that, for example, getting the books from the Booker Prize shortlists for the earlier years, particularly kind of 1969 and all the way through the 70s, is a bit trickier. Luckily, my library has been able to, has kind of links with other London libraries, and I can get loads of them if needed, which is all a really boring preamble to say that I really, this year, as one of my little reading tasks, I want to read all of the Booker Prize shortlisted books from the 1970s, including 1969, because it seems weird to leave it by itself. And as a result, kind of see the early stages of the Booker Prize and compare it to where we're up to now. I also kind of, in the lead up to the Booker Prize for 2021, want to read every every kind of 5 years leading up to that, if that makes sense. So starting in 1971, 1976, 81, blah, 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 all the way up to 2021. And I kind of want to do that for two reasons, partly because that seems like a nice way of organizing it in my mind. But also because that really gives a perspective to be able to look at what has kind of changed over the years. So looking back now at some of the novels that were published in the 1970s and, you know, won the prize or kind of were shortlisted for the prize way back then. So many of those books are so different to some of the books coming out in 2021, 2020, naturally, you know, that's the way it goes. But imagining a book like, I don't know, Burnt Sugar or Love and Other Thought Experiments or even Ducks Newburyport, imagining those books way back doesn't seem right. But at the same time, imagining some of the books like Penelope Fitzgerald's Offshore standing in the same category as some of those books now seems so weird. They're so different. And so I really want to do that and kind of go the way through the list. It's also a really neat way of me doing it so that I'm not just in the 1970s for the entire year, because that's otherwise it. I did for a short while imagine starting the Booker Prize in 1969 and just going through year by year by year. The more I thought about that, the more I just thought that would be painful for myself and for anybody watching videos about them, because it's a long crawl. When you've got 50 odd years of prizes, with about roughly 6 books per year, that's a lot of reading, firstly, and also would mean several years until I even got into books that were being released at the moment. And I really want to be part of the kind of current conversations with some of those books and not leave it till 5 years down the line. My TV habits are basically that, unfortunately, where I've still never seen Mad Men, but I can happily tell you a lot about Dinner Ladies from the 1990s. So that's kind of one of my goals for it. But I realize as well in doing so that the International Booker Prize is also there. And as much as I don't want to get too involved in having another prize kind of shortlist kind of interfering with this, I also do want to start catching up on them, because there aren't that many. They started in 2016, at least in the kind of newer format with a shortlist. And so I kind of thought I'll add those in as they go. So I'll do 2016 and 2021 this year as well for the internationals. Then I realized that this reading challenge was all sounding a bit much and very Booker heavy. So I've got a couple of other bits thrown in to kind of balance it out for my own personal joy and kind of pleasure of reading. So firstly, that's to throw in some books that I have been wanting to read for a while and haven't. And so that is firstly going to be reading the rest of Penelope Fitzgerald's back catalogue, which are not Booker Prize shortlisted. I've read all of her shortlisted ones, and that will be an absolute joy because I love her writing. They're all quite short as well, and I can just sort of sit and really enjoy them and not have to focus too much on thinking about anything wider about making a video on them or anything like that. Similarly, I really want to read the Sally Lockhart series by Philip Pullman. I've been meaning to for a while, and tied into that is the fact that I've got a French copy of the first book from that series, which I haven't wanted to read in French. My French isn't probably good enough to engage with it in a proper sense, but I want to read it at least in English first and then try and read it in French, which brings me to my next point of, you know, have been studying German recently and studied French a while ago, and I've been trying to keep it up. So occasionally I'll try to throw in a book in French or German, which is often painful. It's very, very slow. And I realize how little I know in both languages. I'm definitely not up to the level of being able to read that easily or fluently in either. But I thought maybe starting with something like a Philip Pullman book aimed at teenagers is maybe the right way to start. So I'm also going to try and throw in a few of those. But for me, I think ultimately throughout all of this, although this is a lot of rules and numbers and goals that are very targeted around you've got to read these specific books, one thing I found in 2020 was that sometimes I maybe tied myself too much to having to read Booker Prize books. And as much as many of them are good, there are many that I didn't necessarily enjoy. And there's no worse feeling in some ways when it comes to reading than having to go through a book that you don't particularly enjoy because there's a sense of duty and obligation to having to read that book. I'm looking at you, Will Self, with Umbrella, which I really did not enjoy. But I also felt like I couldn't like DNF them because, which maybe was foolish, but I thought I kind of couldn't DNF them because then it wouldn't have counted as me having read the whole shortlist of that thing. So I'm a bit nervous about some of the longer books where that might come up. But at the same time, I'm fairly happy and confident that, you know, there's enough balance. The Booker Prize books themselves, of the 200 or so books that I'm thinking I'll probably read this year, those Booker Prize ones will probably make about 100, 120, maybe 130, which is still a lot. But that leaves enough wiggle room to just think sod it and go and read other books for a bit and not feel guilty or whatever. And I think that's a real part, right? As much as reading goals are great to kind of motivate yourself to do various things, or to try books that you've never tried before, or to really kick yourself into action, they shouldn't be the sum total of what you're doing with your reading, right? It shouldn't be that you're only reading because you've got to fill a quota of some form. Reading is about enjoyment and about learning and about pleasure. And so a kind of sort of separate goal that's kind of linked to that for me is wanting to take a bit more pleasure and a bit more time with reading this year. I think there are a lot of books this year that I kind of really zoomed through, and I want to spend a bit more time with some books just reading for pleasure. So, you know, whether that's the Sally Lockhart series of just unwinding after a day with those books, or something like that, I think that's the way forward. But anyway, I'd love to hear some of your reading goals for 2021. Maybe if there are any books in particular that you've been meaning to read. I keep on pondering about whether to put A Suitable Boy or Jonathan Norrell, that book, in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I think that's it, in there. You know, a long book that I've been meaning to read for a long time, whether to kind of put that in the list. But I almost don't want to, again, tie myself to it. I want to come to those books when it's right and when I'm really feeling energized to go and read them. So I might hopefully come across them over this year. I might not. It's not the end of the world. But yeah, again, please do let me know any goals you have for reading this year. And either way, whatever you do, goals or not, I hope you have a fantastic 2021, and have a great year of reading as well. All my very best, and take care. Bye-bye.